much for coming down to Zebu Live. Amazing talk. You're obviously building a lot in a lot of different industries, blockchain being a recent focus with Third Web. Congratulations on the raise. What's your sort of favorite use case within the Web3 industry at the moment? What are you thinking, like, I really see that going the full distance?
I think one of the most obvious use cases is for events like this and ticketing, and how do you build communities on an ongoing basis and award the people that have supported the Zebu community at the very start as this continues to scale. You can almost make them shareholders using things like NFTs if they've been to earlier events. And I think fostering that community using NFTs is going to rip everything apart. I sit there with the CEOs of like Live Nation and these companies and Ticketmaster, and I'm seeing how they're starting to view events they throw as the start of a community versus just a one-off exchange, a one-off transaction, and how even the ticket stub itself can be the keys to that ongoing community. So maybe because I'm in an event right now, I think a lot about that, but yeah.
And I think from previous conversations, I know Brewdog and James came on your podcast, and I think that they were one of the pioneers of that community-based equity rounds. Yeah. And I think that they were very innovative, but I think NFTs can be a much more open source way of that. And I'm just wondering, is there any projects that you've seen are doing something interesting that you've got your eye on? Are you working on anything? You
mentioned James at Brewdog. They're doing that, right? So he's going to tokenize his equity for Punk's equity scheme. So, and they'll be one of the first brands to do that. I'm not letting the cat out of the bag here. He's tweeted about it, and I've spoken to him about that on WhatsApp on one occasion. So you're going to see a lot of that. You're going to see companies that care now much more about their customers becoming owners, and they're realizing, what James realized is that he can increase loyalty to the brand of Brewdog. And he realized that there is an existing loyalty, but he could scale it up by offering them a piece of the pie. And with NFTs, that we can now do that in a much simpler, much more transparent, much more decentralized way, with less trust requirement from the owner of the organization. So I imagine a lot of these companies that where they have kind of like a cult following, the Huels of the world, where I'm a big investor, where we feel like we have what we call the hooligans, or the Brewdogs, where they have their punks. I feel like these brands are going to be the first ones in the door, and they're going to set a precedence, which I think a lot of other brands are going to follow, because turning your customers into owners, bringing them closer to the brand is a win-win on both sides. And community, as we've said, as we talked about in my talk today, is becoming more important now than ever. I think in 2019, it was the buzzword of our industry, of the marketing social media industry, this word community. Every meeting I'd go to, brands talking about community. And the reason they're talking about it is because we thought we had community if we had 1,000 or 1 million followers on social media. We didn't have community there. We had a one-to-one relationship, which was decaying because of algorithms that stood between us. Real community is a each to each. It's a many to many, where you foster the community and you're just a pillar of it. And so now brands are trying to, all of the brands I've spoken to, I even spoke to Nicola Mendelsohn, who's the head of Facebook. Her job at Facebook is to deal with all of the businesses that use Facebook's platform. And she said to me off air, she said, the number one thing I'm being asked at the moment by brands is, what is Web3? And what is the metaverse? And how do we get involved? That's the number one thing she's being asked at Facebook, which is very much a Web2 company. I think we're going to see the death of social networks, and we're going to see the rise of decentralized communities.
Yeah, and I guess community is a really interesting one that you touched on a lot, and it's definitely been a huge buzzword. Do you see there any disadvantages of listening to the community too much, and how do you sort of curb that? And that's a kind of like unorthodox question. Listening
to the community too much? There's always a downside of asking anybody what they want, because people do not know what they want. And when you ask them, they'll tell you what they think they want. I mean, the prime example is they talk about horses, right? People wanted faster horses.
The Rory Sutherlands, the Henry Fords.
Over there. Yeah, they thought they wanted faster horses. They didn't know they wanted a car. They didn't know it was possible. People thought they wanted maybe a bigger keyboard on their smartphones. They didn't know that they actually wanted to use this as their stylus, and they didn't want a keyboard at all. People thought they wanted a USB port on a phone, or an iPhone jack on a phone. They didn't know they wanted they wouldn't have asked for Bluetooth. And so we've seen time and time again, if you ask people what they want, you'll never get really a great answer. So a project being community feedback driven is important, but I still think that real innovation comes from old ideas being connected in entirely new ways, usually with a new technology that's enabling it. So listening to the community is one thing. People want to feel, the sort of basic needs of humans is to feel heard and understood. So it's great to ask, but then when it comes to what you're building and the direction of your roadmap, it's much smarter to build your roadmap or your business or whatever you're trying to solve, even your relationship, based on first principles, which is like fundamental truths that you know to be true, and then to reason up from there. So a first principle truth might be entrepreneurship is lonely. Okay, so we believe that to be true. Entrepreneurs are more successful when they have someone they can speak to about the problem they're facing. That's also a truth. Entrepreneurs geographically face different challenges. We go, okay, that's also something that's true. And even with those 3 first principles, you go, okay, so what we need to do is we need to do localized networking for entrepreneurs in terms of community, because an entrepreneur in India speaking to an entrepreneur in San Francisco, they have an entirely different set of challenges. There's 3 first principle truths which have made me, in my mind then, realize that with our Founders Club thing, we actually need to localize the communities. Global communities aren't as effective as localized ones. So that's an example of how you create a solution just by reasoning up from first principle truths, or you just accept convention and you never do well. Elon says it, when he was faced with the challenge of creating a new electric vehicle, they said, well, you can't because it's too expensive, they're too slow. But he goes, well, from first principles, if you buy the metal from the metal exchange, and I buy nickel from here, and if I do it like this, all from first principles, we can create a fast and affordable electric car. All of the innovation comes from first principles, but it's almost impossible to do because no one wants to go to the extra mental effort. So.
Yeah, 100%. And just to tie off the community piece, I definitely think a lot of young entrepreneurs, specifically in Web3, become a dog chasing its tail with listening to the community and flying with the wind. And I think that the expectation setting is really the main thing of saying, this is where we're going to allow community input and this is how we're going to do it, because there's that balance of saying, we listen to everything the community says, we're going to act on everything the community says. And I think that people get sort of caught in the winds.
Yeah, so let me give you an example. There's a reason why...
Steve doesn't agree. Here we go, this is good, let's go.
Of course, there's a reason why great books become blockbuster movies, but blockbuster movies never become great books. One of them was written by one person in their first print, Harry Potter. And if you'd assembled a team of writers and told them to write a book about a wizard, it would have had all of the cliche storylines, love, heartbreak, it would have been riddled with cliche and convention. Because one person sits there and writes, thinking from their first principles, their own experience, they create something entirely different. There's a reason why Harry Potter started as a book and became a movie. And these blockbuster movies aren't translating into, can you imagine these big blockbuster movies becoming books and then being interesting? It just doesn't go that way. And it's the same with when you're trying to build new things. If you're in the NFT space, and you ask your community, what should we do next? They're going to think of something they already know. They're going to go, we should do a game. Because they like games, but it doesn't mean that there's a reason why this community and this project should use the blockchain to start a game. It's just going to be the idea that they had, not based on any real first principle thinking. So there's a danger to asking people for feedback or seeking consensus. Consensus isn't a great thing. It's a really bad thing, especially when it comes to building a business. If I turn to my team members and go, right, tell me all of you tell me exactly how our company culture should be, you'll get 50 different types of response. I can't please everybody. And the most important thing is actually, what is our company founded to do in the world? And we're meant to be reverse engineering our company culture and all of our systems internally back from there. So if we're building electric cars, we're going to need someone in the fucking factory. You know what I mean? Had I asked them, I'm sure no one would have said, I want to go to a factory, So it should be, everything you're building should be reverse engineered by what you're trying to achieve in the world, not by seeking consensus. We can seek consensus about the playlist in the office or the stuff that's in the fridge or where we go on holiday. But as it relates to the mission, it shouldn't be me making the decision. It should be determined by our North Star. And so it's not a consensus thing. It's what's the best answer based on what we're trying to achieve.
The Pareto Efficiency and moving to try and please everyone is definitely something that gets...
I have no idea what that means.
heavily in the way. It's trying to say that
I want to learn something new. Pareto Efficiency.
Pareto Efficiency. So that's making someone else better off without making anyone else worse off.
Okay, so pretend you didn't tell me that. I'll add Pareto's efficiency. It made me look good. So, and that's all about Pareto's efficiency.
There we go.
Just cut that in at the start.
100%. And then this is last question.
Okay.
So, going to play the Uno reverse card on you. Is there any question that you haven't been asked or that you're always happy to avoid, and why?
You know, people don't typically ask you what you're like. They just don't typically ask you about your flaws and your deficiencies and what you're bad at, because they might be impressed by something that I've done. But the more interesting stuff is always the stuff, not that stuff. It's always the other stuff. It's like the struggles, the doubts, all of those fears. It's all of that stuff. That's the really interesting stuff, because that's when you realise that even some of the people that you admire in business or sports or whatever, that they're just like you. And when you understand that, that's a bridge to you to realise that you can be just like them in terms of their success. That's what we try and do in the podcast, really. It's trying to demystify and de-heroise, not a word either. I'm not saying yours wasn't a word, I'm just saying that's definitely not a word. De-heroise the persona so that it becomes accessible to you sitting there at home. And you go, well, yeah, Mm-hmm. So anything around those topics I love and enjoy, because it also makes me feel uncomfortable sometimes.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming down to
Thanks
CB
for
Live. I
having me.
really appreciate it, Steve.
Your nails are sick.
Oh yeah, 2022, painting nails.
Yeah, it's dope. It's cool.